Welcome, this is Ms. Carlino, and our topic today is Chapter 6, the skeletal system, bones, and bone tissue. Today we're going to focus on how bone tissue works. By the end of this lecture, you should understand bone structure from the microscopic to the gross level, how bones grow and repair themselves, and how bones help regulate calcium in your body. Before we get into bone structure, let's look at the big picture. The skeletal system performs several essential functions for the body. First, it provides support and a structural framework, giving the body its shape and allowing us to stand upright. It also protects our vital organs, such as the skull protecting the brain and the ribs protecting the heart and lungs. The skeletal system enables body movement by working together with skeletal muscles, which pull on the bones to create motion. Bones also serve as a site for fat and mineral storage. Fat is stored in yellow bone marrow. The minerals calcium and phosphate are stored in the bone and can be released back into the blood when needed. Finally, bones are responsible for blood cell production or hematopoiesis, which occurs in the red bone marrow. So what exactly is included in the skeletal system? First, we have bones, also called osseous tissue. Remember that connective tissue is made of cells and lots of extracellular matrix. In bone, that matrix is hard and calcified, and the tissue still contains living cells. The skeletal system also includes cartilage, which provides flexible support, protection, and cushioning in areas where movement is needed. In addition, there are ligaments, which connect bone to bone. You can remember this as BBL. Finally, tendons connect muscle to bone, allowing muscles to pull on bones and create movement. Let's go back to bone or osseous tissue and look at what cells are found in them. As was mentioned, bone has the calcified extracellular matrix, but it also contains living cells. Before we look at each bone cell in detail, here's a quick overview of the three main types. Osteoblasts are the cells that build new bone. So you can remember blast for building. Osteoclasts are cells that break the bone down. And osteocytes are the mature cells that maintain the bone. Now let's look at each one to see how they work and where they're found. We'll start with osteoblasts, the cells that build bone. Osteoblasts are responsible for bone deposition, which means they deposit or add new bone material where a bone needs to grow, be strengthened, or repaired. The term ossification is simply the formation of new bone. During bone deposition, osteoblasts lay down bone matrix, which hardens as minerals like calcium are added. Because calcium is used to make bone, the blood calcium levels decrease with bone deposition. Osteoblasts are found on the surface of bones that are growing or being remodeled. After they finish their work, some of them become osteocytes, which live inside the bone and help maintain it. Next, let's look at the osteoclasts, the cells that do the opposite. They break down bone. Osteoclasts are the bone resorbing cells. They break down bone by secreting acids and enzymes which dissolve the hard matrix. Bone resorption releases calcium from the bone, where it then migrates into the bloodstream. This process increases the levels of calcium in the blood. Osteoclasts are located on bone surfaces where remodeling or repair is needed. think of them as demolition crews, clearing away old or damaged bone so new bone can be laid down. The coordinated action of osteoclasts and osteoblasts allow bones to stay strong, flexible, and properly shaped. Finally, let's examine osteocytes, the cells that maintain the bone once it's formed. Osteocytes are mature bone cells embedded in small spaces or lacuna in the bone matrix. They maintain the bone matrix. But what does that mean? Osteocytes sense mechanical stress, and then they communicate with osteoblasts and osteoclasts, where the bone needs to be strengthened or resorbed. Osteocytes communicate with each other and with the osteoblasts and osteoclasts through tiny channels in the bone matrix called caniculi, kind of like canaliculi. This allows coordination of the bone's ongoing maintenance. Together, osteoblasts, osteoclasts, and osteocytes keep bones healthy, strong, and able to adapt to the stresses placed on them. Now that we understand how bone cells work to build, break down, and maintain bone, we can move on to the histology of bone. Before looking more closely at bone histology, it's important to understand that there are two types of bone tissue in the body: compact bone and spongy bone. Even though both types are made of the same cells and have the same extracellular matrix, they differ in how these materials are organized, and which then gives them different structures and functions. Compact bone is very dense with a large amount of bone matrix and very little open space. This is the bone we looked at in lab. In the image shown, the outer layer of the bone is compact bone. Because it is tightly packed and solid, compact bone is strong and resistant to breaking, making it well suited for protection and supporting the body's weight. Spongy bone, in contrast, has more open space and less bone matrix. Instead of being solid, it forms a honeycomb-like network of thin bone structures called trabeculae. Looking at the image again, spongy bone is found between two layers of compact bone. You can think of this arrangement like a sandwich, with compact bone as the bread and spongy bone as the filling. Notice the many spaces within the spongy bone and how different it looks from the dense compact bone. This compact, spongy, compact arrangement allows bones to remain strong and protective without being unnecessarily heavy. Spongy bone reduces weight while still providing support. A good example of this is the skull, where protection is essential, but excess bone weight would be undesirable. Let's move on to the histology of compact bone. Compact bone, which is the hard, dense bone that forms the outer layer of most bones. Compact bone is organized in repeating structural units called osteons, also known as Haversian systems. This highly organized arrangement allows compact bone to be strong and resistant to stress, making it ideal for protection and weight support. In this image, you can see many osteons packed tightly together. Each osteon looks like a tree trunk that's been cut, with rings of bone forming circles around the center. Each osteon has several key components. As we go through each structure, be sure to pause the video and find it on the images. At the center of each osteon is the central canal, which contains blood vessels and nerves that supply the bone. Perforating canals run sideways and connect the central canals of neighboring osteons. This allows blood vessels and nerves to travel between the different osteons. Surrounding the central canal are rings of tissue called lamellae. They are concentric rings of mineralized bone matrix. Between the lamellae are small spaces called lacunae, where osteocytes are located. These osteocytes are connected to each other and to the central canal by tiny channels called caniculi. Caniculi allow osteocytes to communicate with each other and wastes and nutrients to move through the bone. I've included larger versions of these same images on the next two slides. Be sure to identify the structures of the osteon in the images. You should study and know all of these structures. This image shows the location of compact bone on the outer edge of long bone. Notice the arrangements of osteons packed closely together. They look like tree trunks. Down the center of each osteon is a central canal with nerves and blood vessels. Perforating canals connect the central canals. Here are close-ups of an osteon. Notice the central canal in the middle. This is where the nerve and blood vessels are found. Lamellae are the rings of tissue surrounding the central canal. Lacuna are the spaces in the matrix where osteocytes reside. Caniculi are the small channels through which osteocytes communicate and nutrients and waste travel. Now let's move on to the histology of spongy bone. Spongy bone is found sandwiched between layers of compact bone. This is shown in the topmost part of the image. Unlike compact bone, spongy bone has no osteons. Instead, it's made of thin plates of bone called trabeculae. Having trabeculae instead of osteons makes spongy bone lighter weight than compact bone. The trabeculae are oriented along lines of stress, which helps the bone resist forces placed on it. You can think of this structure like scaffolding, supportive but lightweight. In the middle of the image, you can see how trabeculae create spaces. The spaces between the trabeculae aren't empty. They are filled with bone marrow and blood vessels, making spongy bone important for both support and blood cell production because bone marrow produces red blood cells. Now that we're looking at the microscopic structure of compact and spongy bone, let's zoom out and look at how these tissues are organized in a whole bone, specifically a long bone. A long bone is a bone that is longer than it is wide, such as the femur, the humerus, or the tibia. The ends of the bone are called the epiphyses. I remember this as E for the end of the bone and E for epiphysis. The epiphyses are made mostly of spongy bone, covered by a layer of compact bone. The long part between the epiphyses is called the diaphysis, or the shaft of the bone. This is made mostly of compact bone, giving the bone strength. So in a long bone, compact bone forms the outer shell, while spongy bone is concentrated at the ends. Now that we've seen the overall structure of a long bone, let's look at the key features inside and on the surface of it. Inside the diaphysis, or the shaft, is the medullary cavity. In adults, this cavity usually contains yellow bone marrow, which is where we store fat. Isn't that strange? We have fat inside of our bones. In infants, it is filled with red bone marrow, where red blood cells are produced. Red bone marrow is found also in the spaces of the spongy bone found at the ends of the long bone. The periosteum, peri for around, ost meaning bone, is a tough connective tissue that covers the outer surface of the bone, except at the ends. It protects the bone, anchors tendons and ligaments, and supports growth and repair. The ends of a long bone are covered with articular cartilage, which is made of hyaline cartilage. Articular cartilage cushions joints and reduces friction. The end ostium, meaning inside, lines the inner surfaces of the bone and plays an important role in bone remodeling. Specifically, end ostium lines the medullary cavity and the trabeculae of spongy bone. Between the diaphysis and the epiphyses, we find more hyaline cartilage if the bone is still growing, as in children. This hyaline cartilage is called the epiphyseal plate. It is here that the bone grows in length. When growth is completed, as in adults, it then becomes the epiphyseal line, which is made of bone. Be sure to look at the image and find all of these structures before moving on. Not all bones are long. Other than long bones, there are three main shapes of bone. They are shown in the image at the right. These are short, flat, and irregular bones. Sesamoid bones are round bones and only a few exist, so we will not consider them in this video. Flat bones are thin, often curved, and have that sandwich arrangement with compact bone as the bread and the spongy bone between. Examples of flat bones include the skull, sternum, ribs, and the scapula. Short bones are cube-shaped, mostly spongy bone with a thin outer layer of compact bone. Think of your carpals in your wrist and tarsals in your ankle as short bones. Irregular bones have complex shapes that don't fit into the other categories. They have a thin layer of compact bone surrounding the spongy bone. Examples include vertebrae, pelvic bones, and some facial bones. Now that we've looked at the different types of bones and how their structures vary, the next question is, how do bones form in the first place? This process is called ossification, where new bone tissue develops from cartilage or connective tissue. Ossification occurs in four situations: during embryological and fetal development, when bones grow before adulthood, when bones remodel, and when fractures heal. Let's explore the two types of ossification. Bone formation occurs in two different ways. Intramembranous ossification occurs when embryonic connective tissue membranes are replaced by bone. Endochondral ossification occurs when the embryonic hyaline cartilage model is replaced by bone. So intramembranous has the membrane, endochondral uses a hyaline cartilage. Let's begin with intramembranous ossification. In intramembranous ossification, bone develops from embryonic connective tissue membranes called mesenchyme. This tissue condenses, differentiates into osteoblasts, and begins secreting bone matrix. This process is responsible for forming flat bones, such as the skull bones. It's also important for growth and repair of these bones throughout life. Notice that no cartilage is used here. Bone forms directly from embryonic membranes, which is why it's called intramembranous, meaning within the membrane. The second way we make bone is through endochondral ossification. This is the way most of our bones are formed. If you've taken medical terminology, you learned that the root chondr means cartilage. So endochondral ossification relies on a cartilage model to form bones. In endochondral ossification, a hyaline cartilage model develops. The cartilage model looks roughly the same shape as the bone will look once ossification is completed. Look at the leftmost image to view the cartilage model. The cartilage model grows, cartilage cells enlarge and die, and osteoblasts form from the perichondrium gradually invade and replace the cartilage with bone matrix. Endochondral ossification is used to make long, short, and irregular bones, like the femur, humerus, and phalanges. Most of our bones are formed using endochondral ossification. Endochondral ossification is important for bone growth in length because cartilage in the epiphyseal plate continues dividing and serving as a template for new bone until adulthood. We've just learned how bones form during development. Although bones are solid, long-lasting structures, they do not stay the same. After ossification, bones are continuously shaped and repaired through a process called bone remodeling. Bone remodeling allows bones to maintain strength, repair microdamage, and help regulate calcium levels in the body. Bone remodeling involves both osteoblasts, which build bone, and osteoclasts, which break down bone. Let's take a look at how this all works. It's important to note that bone remodeling is the ongoing process where old and damaged bone is replaced by new bone to maintain strength and proper shape. It involves two main actions happening together: bone resorption and bone deposition. Bone resorption is when osteoclasts remove old or damaged bone. Bone resorption releases calcium that was in the old bone into the bloodstream. This results in increased blood calcium levels. Bone deposition occurs when osteoblasts deposit new bone. Bone deposition uses calcium from the blood to make the new bone. Remodeling doesn't happen randomly. Bones remodel in areas where they are used and stressed the most. When a bone experiences regular stress, like during exercise, it responds by becoming stronger in those areas. Bone remodeling alters the shape of the bone based on the stress put upon it. Calcium levels in the blood also influence remodeling. If blood calcium levels are low, bone may be broken down to release calcium. When blood calcium levels are adequate, bone deposition is favored. Bone remodeling also increases after injuries, helping repair cracks or damage before they become serious. Overall, bone remodeling allows bones to adapt to stress, repair themselves, and help maintain proper mineral balance in the body. Take a moment to watch the video showing the process of bone remodeling. Notice the blue and red cells. Here are the red cells. What's happening? And here are the blue cells. What's happening with them? Let's watch the video again. What type of cells are the red and blue cells? The red cells are resorbing bone matrix. That makes them osteoclasts. The blue cells are depositing bone matrix, making them osteoblasts. They're building bone. We've talked about bone remodeling, how bone is broken down and rebuilt. One important reason this process matters is because bones store calcium. In fact, bones act like a calcium bank. When the body needs calcium, bones release it through bone resorption. When we have a lot of calcium, more is stored in the bone by depositing more bone. Calcium isn't just for bones. The body needs a very specific level of calcium in the blood for skeletal and cardiac muscles to contract and for nerves to send signals. If blood calcium is too low or too high, these processes don't work correctly, which can be dangerous. Keeping blood calcium levels within a narrow, healthy range is called calcium homeostasis. This balance is tightly regulated by hormones, and bone remodeling plays a key role in making it happen. Let's start with what happens when blood calcium levels drop too low. If blood calcium levels are too low, we need to get more calcium from somewhere. And we get that from our bones and what we eat. In response to low blood calcium, the parathyroid glands release parathyroid hormone, or PTH. The parathyroid glands are found on the posterior of the thyroid in your neck. PTH causes an increase in the number of osteoclasts and increased osteoclast activity. Remember, osteoclasts break down bone tissue during bone resorption, which releases calcium into the bloodstream. PTH also leads to the activation of vitamin D in the kidneys. Activated vitamin D is called calcitriol. Calcitriol increases calcium absorption in the small intestine, so more of the calcium from food reaches the blood. Together, increased osteoclast activity and calcium absorption from food raise the blood calcium levels back to a safe range. Now let's look at the opposite situation, when blood calcium levels are too high. In this case, the thyroid gland releases the hormone calcitonin. You can remember this because calcitonin tones down the calcium level. Calcitonin decreases osteoclast activity, slowing bone resorption. At the same time, osteoblasts continue to use blood calcium during bone deposition. As more calcium is stored in the bone, blood calcium levels decrease and return to normal. This constant balance between osteoclasts and osteoblasts allow bones to stay strong while maintaining calcium homeostasis. We've talked about bone remodeling and calcium homeostasis, processes that happen continuously to maintain bone strength and balance our calcium levels. But when a bone is injured or fractured, the body shifts from routine remodeling to a focused repair process. Bone repair uses the same cells we've already discussed, osteoclasts and osteoblasts. But now they work together in a specific sequence to heal a break. Let's walk through the 4 stages of bone repair. The first stage of bone repair is hematoma formation. When a bone fractures, blood vessels are damaged, causing bleeding at the injury site. This blood collects and forms a hematoma or blood clot. Although this looks messy, the hematoma is important because it starts inflammation and brings in cells needed for the healing. The next stage, a fibrocartilaginous callus forms. So we call this callus formation. Fibroblasts begin producing collagen fibers, and chondrocytes produce cartilage. Together they form a soft callus that bridges the broken ends of the bone. The callus stabilizes the fracture, but it is not yet strong enough to support normal stress. And you can see this in the image. In the third stage, the soft callus is replaced by a bony callus. So we call this callus ossification. Osteoblasts begin depositing bone matrix, replacing the cartilage with spongy bone. And you can see this in the image. At this point, the fracture is much stronger, though the bone may still be thicker or uneven at the repair site. The final stage of bone repair is bone remodeling. During this stage, osteoclasts remove excess bone from the bony callus, while osteoblasts rebuild compact bone where it's needed. Importantly, remodeling is influenced by how the bone is used. Areas that experience more stress and weight bearing are strengthened by bone deposition, while areas that are used less may be resorbed. Over time, the bone regains its original shape, structure, and strength, adapted to the stresses placed on it. This process can take months to years, depending on the injury and overall health.